Quick tip number 11, the histogram. So real quick, before we get into camera specifics, a histogram is simply a graph. Now, when we're talking about it in the terms of photography, we're talking about a graph that simply displays where the brightness levels of your image are. And in this case, the left-hand side represents the dark, the right-hand side represents the light, and in between is the varying degrees of dark to light. You can kind of divide it up into 5 equally spaced zones. And the middle is your middle kind of 18% gray that the camera is always trying for. So some might say a perfect histogram is something that looks like this, with a kind of bell curve with a perfect distribution centered on your medium gray. The truth is that there really is no such thing as a perfect histogram because every single picture is different. And the amount of light and dark in your picture is going to vary greatly based on your composition. Let's jump over to Lightroom and look at a few samples and look at the histogram here in detail. So in this first picture, we are looking at a little boy wearing a red jacket on a red bench. And you can see that it is exposed fairly nicely. Our histogram information peaks in the middle. And so our exposure is good for this example. Let's switch to a very different looking example, and that is a starry night sky. And now take a look at our histogram and you can see that everything is jammed up against that left-hand side. That represents our darks, and in this picture, this came out exactly the way I wanted it to. And maybe if you had looked at just the histogram without looking at the picture, you would say, well, this is going to be terrible. This is completely dark and there's nothing to see. Well, there is a lot of dark with no detail in those areas, but then there is just enough that the stars in it works. Let's switch back to another normal example. And so what you want to be looking for and why the histogram is useful is on the back of that camera. That screen is nice. They are so much nicer than they were just a few years ago, but you still can't get a completely accurate representation of how your picture is going to come out. And the histogram is another clue that can kind of help you determine where your exposure is. If you look at the back of that camera and it looks good, but all of your histogram information is smooshed up against one side or the other, you need to know that you're going to be missing a lot of detail. If it's smack in the middle, you're going to have detail and you can work with that, especially if it's a raw image. I'm going to throw in an additional tip here, and that is that in Lightroom, when you're in the Develop module and you have this histogram displayed right here, you have control over it. And that means that on the left-hand side, it represents the black controls, the shadows next to that, in the middle, the exposure, to the right highlights, and to the right of that, the whites. So I can come in here in the middle exposure area and I can grab anywhere in here and drag. And I'm just dragging to the left, and you can see that the histogram is moving left and the image is getting darker as I push those pixels to the left in their brightness values, or decrease the brightness. Or I can push it to the right and increase their brightness values until we start to hit the right hand side, and now we're starting to lose information in it, and it's not as good a picture, and I can bring it back. And as I said, you can adjust the blacks up there by brightening them or decreasing them. Basically, moving anything to the right is going to raise the lightness value. Moving anything to the left is going to lower the lightness value. Let's do a quick pop quiz. I'm about to click on a snowy scene picture. Where do you think most of the histogram is going to be? Here's the snowy picture. And if you said over on the right hand side, because snow is white or very bright, then you are correct. If we lower this exposure, we can start to get that gray snow, and it's just a little bit duller of a photo, but you can see that we are recovering detail out of it. Again, that's a nice feature of shooting raw. Now, it's not just when you are working in Lightroom that your histogram is useful. As I said, it can show you the histogram on the camera as well. Let's take a look at how to do that now. Here I have a Canon camera, and we are looking at the review of an image I shot a few moments ago of me holding a Rubik's Cube. And I've decreased the brightness value of the monitor so that it comes out on this video a little bit better. But what we can do is we can press the info button to cycle through some different options that are available to us when we're reviewing an image. So now you can see we have our shutter speed and our aperture. We know what image number this is and the number of images on the card. If I press info one more time, we get even more information, including the histogram. So there is the histogram. We can see that this image is exposed rather nicely, and we have more information about the ISO it was shot at, what file type it was, and all of those other settings. If we move into live view, when you're in live view, and we can press info just the same and cycle through until we get a live histogram, and you can see as I move that histogram is live, and it just gives you a little bit more information about the scene you're about to shoot. So that was tonight's quick tip. The histogram is useful and gives you useful information that you should use in conjunction with reviewing the image to help you determine if your exposure is where you would like it to be. If you have any questions about histograms or other exposure information, just leave a comment down below or come over and find me on the Facebook. Thanks for watching this quick tip.